Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowships for New Americans for this special information session today. This is a session that is being recorded, and we're here to talk about essays, specifically our application essays for the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowships. We are really excited to have some current fellows with us who are going to be talking about how they approach the application process with the focus on the essays. And I'm really pleased to not only have the fellows, but also have the director of the fellowship, Craig Harwood, here, and my colleague Yamila Lopez, who answers all the questions. She'll answer questions today in the chat and Q&A, but also when you email us, you're likely to get her. You might also get me. And sometimes if you call our office, you might get Julian or Craig. So we're really happy to be here today. You can ask questions in the Q&A in the chat throughout the presentation. The Q&A is probably the best place. We would love for you folks who are live with us to just say hello in the chat. And if you could just tell us what you're focusing on and maybe share your country of heritage, since we are a fellowship for new Americans, that would be great. And you can also upvote questions in the Q&A. So if you put a question in, or if you see somebody else's question that you really want answered, that would be great. I do want to just make clear that we do have other information sessions that cover eligibility and other parts of the application. Actually, tomorrow there's one on optional exhibits. Today, we're really just going to be zeroing in on the essays. So the first thing I want to do is introduce you to our fellows. So I'm going to ask them to just briefly introduce themselves by sharing what they are studying, a little bit about their new American experience, or like if you're an immigrant, child of immigrants, and what country of heritage or countries your family is from. And if you could tell us maybe one fun fact about the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowships that you enjoy, that would be great. Jupneet, would you be able to start? So just like tell us what you're studying and a little bit about your new American experience.
Yeah, so I'm Jupneet. Nice to meet you all. I'm a child of Sikh Punjabi immigrants from India. And right now I'm in Oxford doing the Rhodes Scholarship. I did a Master of Public Policy and a Master's in Translational Health Sciences. And before this, I was at MIT and did a degree in chemistry. And after this, I'll be going to medical school at Harvard Med at an HST program in August. I'm also current US Air Force, so I'm active duty military. That's kind of my background. And with the Soros Fellowship, I was really drawn to it just because I think the mission is really unique in kind of honoring our heritage and honoring where we come from, but also showing appreciation and honoring the American side and the Bill of Rights and just bringing those two together, which is a huge part of my story, being a child of immigrants and also serving the American military. So kind of bringing those two worlds together just really spoke to me and is why I applied to Soros.
Hi everyone, my name's Henry. I was born in Vietnam. I came over here with my parents when I was just a wee child, about a year old. And I did my undergrad at Penn, studying computational biology and economics. And now I'm a first year PhD student at Columbia, also in computational biology. I'm interested in studying systematically how viruses interact with their host. And I think a really fun part about Swords, or the reason why I applied, is that there's a lot of other fellowships that like was part of or applied to, and the Soros one was the only one that I heard that it felt like a family, not like a networking event, but a real community that you could always come back to, and that's what really drew me to it.
Hello everyone, my name is Leslie. I'm a 2024 PD Soros Fellow. I am currently in my final year of architecture studies. I study at the design school at Harvard. I study architecture, MArch 2. I studied architecture as well in my undergrad. I went to Rhode Island School of Design in Providence, Rhode Island. And I think what I found the most fascinating or like fun fact about the PD Soros is when I met other of my like other peers of mine from both the class of 2024 and the class of 2023. I really loved meeting people whose parents like didn't go to college, or like who like were first gen, and like going to even like a grad school was like really a new experience for us. And so I met a lot of people who transitioned from community college and etc. So different walks of life, and I felt really seen, I think, especially being or continuing higher education. I feel I see less of myself more and more. And so I really felt myself seen in this environment. And yeah, so that's a really beautiful part about being in this fellowship, I would say.
Thank you so much. Well, we are so lucky to have all of you. And one of the reasons why we do these sessions is because we don't require an institutional endorsement for our fellowship. Anyone can apply to the fellowship who is applying to graduate school and meets our eligibility criteria. But we want to make sure that everyone gets the best information possible, and that you really understand what we're asking for. So part of why we do these sessions is to make sure that you have the information that the fellows themselves are giving to their peers, and that you can really hear directly that sort of best information. And also, as a staff member, I know what our process is, but I haven't gotten the fellowship, and so that is a big difference, right? So it can be much more helpful to hear from people who have written the essays and really have thought about it from different perspectives. So we'll go through, I'm just going to touch on some of the selection process, and then we'll really jump into the essays and talk through those, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So again, folks can use the Q&A to part of this webinar to ask questions. And I'm so loving all of the introductions in the chat. It's really amazing to see where everyone's coming from and what they're studying. So thank you. Keep those coming. And congratulations to everyone who is pursuing higher ed, because that is an amazing thing that we should celebrate. So the fellowship, as you all know, is for immigrants and children of immigrants. It's merit-based, and it's a graduate school fellowship. So that's kind of the baseline that everyone is coming from. And I won't go into our selection criteria because our other sessions have it, but I just want to ground us in the idea that this is what the fellowship is looking for. So when we're reading your essays and thinking about your whole application, we are looking for these qualities. And the essays are going to be one part of your application that really shows off these qualities. So just, it's always helpful to kind of keep these in mind, and they are available on our website, this list. In terms of the application process, this is really what the essays fit into. So, there's some background questions, a resume or CV, graduate school transcripts, the entrance scores, these two essays that we'll talk about, the optional exhibits and the recommendations, and then we have our interviews that happen if you're selected as as a finalist. So again, these are just part of the application, but I would say, really are the heart of the application. They really say the most about you. Our selection process is merit-based, so that means it's not a need-based fellowship. We don't have any quotas in throughout the whole process, and we have a holistic review process that is really looking at your whole background. And the reason why I want to also say this in this essay information session is because we, unlike other fellowships, we are looking really at the full you. And because we're merit-based and many of our applicants are coming from very different backgrounds, we look at merit widely. So maybe, for example, you are somebody who helped your your grandmother while you were in high school, and you spent a lot of time making sure that taking care of her. That, if that was a significant part of your life, that could be something that you might want to tell us, because that is important information. Maybe during college you had a job as a waiter, and while that might not be something that contributes to who you are as an academic or a professional in the field that you want to be in, we might look at that as merit because we see the value in your hard work and your ability to support yourself. So it's important to think broadly about what your accomplishments are and what you would like us to know about you, because we can only understand you based on the obstacles and the opportunities that you have faced. So this is a holistic review process, and we have a concept called the distance traveled, which is just essentially thinking about that very concept. What are the obstacles and opportunities that an applicant has faced, and what is the distance they have traveled to get to where they are academically and professionally? Those are big questions that we're asking. And then, the other pieces here are less relevant, but we are really just looking at the whole perspective, the whole process, the whole package. And we are a nonpartisan 501c3. We don't have a political perspective or agenda. All of our applications are reviewed after the deadline, and you can apply more than once. And we have a reapplicants info session coming up. So without further ado, this is essay 1. Craig, would you be so kind as to read us this essay question?
Sure. All right. Thanks. Tell us about your experiences as a new American, whether as an immigrant yourself or as a child of immigrants. How have your experiences as a new American informed and shaped who you are and your accomplishments? Feel free to discuss how individual people, such as family or teachers, institutions, aspects of law, culture, society, or American governance made an impact on your life as an immigrant or child of immigrants. The program is especially interested in understanding and contextualizing your accomplishments, be they personal, professional, or academic. So it's a long question, but in-house, we call this the New American question. How has being a new American shaped who you are, shaped your goals, shaped your trajectory?
Exactly. And there's a lot to go off of here with these sub questions. So there's a lot to, there's a lot of different directions that you can take this essay. And of course, if you're an immigrant, you're somebody who came here yourself, your essay is going to probably take one shape. And if you're the child of immigrants, it's probably going, maybe not a different shape, but it's going to focus in different ways, partly on your parents or your grandparents and the decisions that they've made. So I want to start off for this first essay, asking, I'm not going to ask every question to each of you, but I'm wondering, Henry, if you could tell us a little bit about whether you focused your essay on your parents' story, your grandparents' story. Like, who did you focus on in this?
Yeah, that was definitely a struggle because I felt like my story really began with my grandparents, because the reason why my family's here is because of the Vietnam War, and my grandfather was like fighting with the US, and so that was like how far in the past I wanted to go. I think I had many different iterations. It really started with, it's almost ballooned to like half of the essay being that, but then I realized that that wasn't any of my journey. And so maybe just to be like, just in terms of like percentage, I really tried to keep it to about like maybe like 5 to 10% of the essay, and really focus on how that affected me, and what I drew inspiration from, and how that kind of uh, defined my trajectory. And so that was more in the introduction, but it was always a theme that I pulled back to in the middle of the essay and the end of the essay itself.
Great. And Leslie, how did you approach that? Parents' story, your family's story?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and sorry, I forgot to mention earlier. I'm a daughter of Mexican immigrants. Or I'm a child of. Yeah, for me, I think because I'm in the design school and I consider myself an artist and an aspiring architect, I kind of went back to what kind of has always inspired my creativity, or yeah, even when I am like feeling maybe not as motivated in my work or something, and I'm like, what do I think about when I want to like start a project or something? And I realized I always thought about my family. And so I grew up in a construction family. My dad, my uncles, my cousins, basically everyone on the male side of my family work in construction. They work in roofing. And so that was kind of my upbringing. Like when I go to school, my dad picks me up and I'm sitting next to like a big pack of roofing shingles, and they're like, we're all like going in the back. So it's like, like you see nails like on the floor, and it's just my whole childhood is just like construction material and hearing my family talk about, the job or so on. And so I felt, yeah, like that's like where everything has started. That's what is always rooted in my interest. And even seeing like them like reuse materials to make something new or whatever it may be. And so I mean, how that also sparked my kind of understanding of sustainability and reuse of materiality in our fields, in our built environment. And so I guess like for me it was important to not only connect like what my vision is for the field of architecture, but also how personally I've been able to connect that with not only my own story and ambitions, but also my parents and their family background. And so I think that's kind of everything. But this took a lot of kind of talking and reflecting and so on. But I would say this is how I answered this question. Yeah.
Amazing. All right. And this Jupneet, this is a personal essay. So, like, I think that's one thing that we have to stress to applicants, especially applicants who may not have been asked to write a personal essay before like this. It's a little bit different from what you're typically asked for by graduate schools or colleges, although it's a little bit like a college entrance essay. But like, how personal were your essays? I mean, I think we'll talk more about the second essay, but how personal was your first essay? And like, how did you know what was too personal to share, or like what was kind of the right level of personal for you?
Yeah, I think this essay was probably one of the most personal essays I've written because I think the question just asks you to dig really deep compared to other essays I've written, which is one thing that I think was challenging about it, but also made the essay that I eventually wrote very meaningful. And even looking back on it, I'm like, wow, I really dug deep for this essay because I think I pulled out anecdotes from my own life, but like everyone was saying, also going back to my parents' story and trying to connect the dots there. So it was very much a balance of honoring what my parents have done and saying, I wouldn't have these opportunities, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the fact that my parents wanted to come to the US. And then kind of also talking about the child immigrant experience. And for me, I think being in the military, I really wanted to talk about why I joined the military because that's also a big part of my immigrant story. And I had to kind of dig deep for that and connect it to my Sikh heritage and kind of brought all those things together. So I think going as personal as you feel comfortable is really nice because then you're able to show the Soros Committee who you are. And I think that's what this essay is about, is like really bringing in experiences that you think represent who you are. And for me, that was, my military experiences, but also some experiences I had working in Punjab, and then connecting those two and showing why those two were actually very related and then related to my professional goals and showing where my motivations came from. And for me, at least, the best way to demonstrate that was through bringing up very personal experiences and motivations, because I think I was really able to represent who I was. And if I didn't, bring in personal anecdotes and stories, I think it would have, then the committee wouldn't have been able to see where I was coming from or why I was doing the things that I was doing. So, as comfortable as you are, and of course, as comfortable as your family is, But I think as personal as you can go is really helpful, and also you're able to introspect on your own story.
And I think, what you're touching on is like the whys. And so I feel like this essay, what is really helpful about it is it shares like the reason why we are asking for a personal essay. I mean, one, it's because this fellowship is about your new American story, and we want our applicants to be in touch with their new American story. That's our purpose as a fellowship. But the other part is that we really want to understand why you are motivated to do the things you are. And maybe your new American life has nothing to do with your academic interests. Certainly Leslie's, you can see, this very clear line between architecture and growing up in construction. But for many people, there won't necessarily be that direct connection, but it's still an essay that's helping us understand why you tick, like what drives you, what your values are. And that's really important. So, Henry, I'm wondering if you have, some of our applicants have experienced a lot of trauma, especially since we are a new American fellowship. And I think a question that comes up is like, well, if I have experienced trauma, should I share that in my essay? And like, how much should I share that? And I'll turn this to Craig after. You don't have to give a perfect answer on this, but like, what would be your sense if a peer was to ask you that question? Like, what do you think is the right way to handle this?
Yeah, I think so a big part of my essay I focused on growing up in like a low socioeconomic household and also facing a lot of stigma that comes with that and being an immigrant. And I really do remember like first maybe showing this draft to like a person like in my college's like advising, and some people said it was maybe too much. And I didn't take their advice. And so what I instead, I really wanted to be authentic. And what I like personally, so I maybe, I spent a lot of time in like the nail salon, and that's where like my parents worked. And so that was like kind of the crux of my essay, and where everything was framed around. I think, and I know there's many types of trauma, so I can't speak for everything. But for me, being authentic as possible, and writing and really building around that, I think thankfully it worked out. And I think it was really powerful because it allowed me to reflect on a lot of different things, connect things that I didn't understand before. And it wasn't just for the fellowship, but a really important part of growth for myself, just writing this essay.
Yeah, and I think when I've heard from fellows that when they write this essay, if they've really put the time and energy into it, that the essay can really feel like a compass and like something that they can come back to really just, as Leslie was saying, when she's starting a project and wondering what she's doing, it's like, wait, who am I and what am I doing here? Craig, on that question regarding trauma, like how would you advise applicants who are thinking about, what to share? And obviously I'll say, for anybody, like we just, go gently through this process and be gentle with yourself. But how would you, what's appropriate to share in the essay?
Sure. Well, I would say, first of all, you should be comfortable sharing what you're sharing. I mean, you don't have to share something that, you feel like you're not ready, or this isn't the audience you want to share it with. You need to feel good about your essays. At the same rate, I do want to say that the people who read your essays are all very thoughtful, sensitive people, will treat your information first with privacy, but also with care and understanding. And if you feel like those experiences are important to who you are as a person and really shaped you, and you feel like it's something that you really want to be able to include, we will treat that information with respect.
Great.
I think I have one other thought that I wanted to share as I was hearing the fellows talk, and that's, you hear these very eloquent fellows talking about their essays, and I don't want you to be intimidated and think like, oh, they have these perfectly thoughtful new American experiences, and all they needed to do was write them up. The process of going through this essay and crafting this essay is the process of understanding your new American experience. And I've heard so many times from so many fellows that they had never been asked this question before. They had never thought about it before. And it was simply being asked this question that enabled them to really think about what it meant for them to be a new American. So don't think of this like, oh, you can only write this essay if you've already in your mind come to terms with exactly what it means for you to be a new American. Like, no, being asked this question is the beginning of your journey. It's the beginning of a process, and it's an opportunity for you to think through for yourself what that means, most likely for the very first time.
Yeah, and I just to double down on that, I think a lot of fellows do sound like they have narratives, like they have a storyline, but that also comes from the writing process. So most people have storylines, they just maybe have not thought about it in that way. And it's just like that comes with writing and telling your story, that you then start to understand your story better to the point that you can succinctly tell it to people. And that means that you're also probably leaving a lot out. And that's also part of the essay process and understanding what you're comfortable sharing. When you get to a big group of people and they ask you like to tell you about yourself, like you've thought about that and what that answer might be. So Leslie, I wanted to ask, did you simply tell your story, like, what does it mean to be a new American? And you're like, okay, let me tell you about where I was born, where my parents were born, and here's like the story of how I've gotten to where I am? Or did you sort of pick a theme or an area of focus from your life? Like, what did the structure of the essay kind of look like in that way?
Yeah, thank you, Nika. And yeah, to also to what Craig said, I mean, I couldn't agree more. Like, yeah, maybe when I said my story, I said it like really fast, but that's just because like uh, when I was applying to, I had no idea what I was going to write about, and especially too, because this was the first time, like Craig said, that I was being asked this question. And it definitely took a lot of like brainstorming and just I don't know, just reflecting, I think. And yeah, to answer your question, like I think I started off I think I first started off looking at the question and was like, "Oh, well, what have I written before that maybe that could be similar?" And then I realized that this question was just so different, and the purpose of the PD Soros is really to in applying is really to express yourself. And so that's when I realized I'm like, oh no, okay, like I really need to sit down and reflect. And so I started looking at different themes that relate to both my story, my parents, my families, and my major. And so things like construction, labor, working class, like things that I felt like kind of were things I've always been thinking about. And then from there, I mean, I think like when I like to write, I like to be a little creative with like the thing that I'm saying. So I thought about different moments that I can still think to the day that still really narrate like my new American experience. Like how I told you, like how I just said that I was sitting next to roofing shingles and we're both like jumping in the back of the car. I mean, I'm not lying. It's true. Like it still happens to this day, like with my parents, with my dad's like materials and stuff. And with that, I felt because me myself, I'm like a visual learner. Like I felt like that's the way that I could tell my story. Like, and so I mean, I didn't use that exact description, but that's kind of the way that I thought about how to tell my story. Is like if I feel I'm a visual learner and I'm like a visual thinker, I want to tell my story in a way that's also pretty engaging and can also visualize, like if you're sitting next to me and you're experiencing this new American experience with me, like I want to take you in, and we're gonna experience it together. And that's kind of like the way that I wanted to frame like this kind of storytelling thing. Obviously, there's so many ways to write this essay. This is just the way that I thought because I feel like maybe I don't know, that's just kind of the ways that I think about storytelling sometimes. But yeah, I would say that's kind of how I thought about it. I don't know if I answered your
Okay.
question, but
Well,
that's how
I
thought
think
about it.
what the, it's interesting because it's like you and Henry both have mentioned a place, the nail salon and a car with construction materials. And I think that it can be really helpful, as you said, to think about the moments that you can still remember from growing up, that when you think like, what does it mean to be a new American? What are those places? What do they look like? What do they feel like? And can you bring a reader there to a particular moment? Because that can be a really powerful way to bring somebody into your story or track your story like through, throughout the essay. So thank you. Yeah, very well said. Jupneet, something that comes up, and Henry, I'll also turn this to you. You know, something that comes up is the complexity of the new American experience. Like, when somebody asks you, like, what is the new American experience? Like, there's not necessarily like some perfect answer that you're like, oh, this is my new American experience. So how did you tackle kind of the complexity of what it means to be a new American in your essay, or did you?
Yeah, I think I really had to think about this. And like Henry and Lizzie were saying, I definitely had to go through many iterations of my essay and think through each part of it because it's very specific term and also essay prompt. And I think I definitely did tackle that term. And for me as a new American, I guess practically it means that I'm a child of immigrants. And that's pretty evident from the beginning of my essay because that's just at the forefront of the fact that, both my parents are immigrants. But I don't think I even necessarily started with that. I think I more started with a key kind of takeaway or a key lesson that I've learned and then went into like an anecdote that I really thought represented who I was and built up to kind of how I felt as a new American. And I kind of ended with that, I would say. I went through my entire essay and kind of took you through many of the stories and many of the things that I've experienced. And by the end, I saw, this is how I think about my identity. And I think at the end, it's a nice place because you're kind of able to see, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense of why she thinks about herself like that. I had this one line in my essay that was, I have a lot of different pieces of my identity. I'm Sikh, I'm Indian, I'm Punjabi, I'm in the military, I'm a future doctor, but all these things kind of at the forefront, being American is always there. And I think that line kind of encapsulated what being new American meant to me. And even though I didn't use the words new American, just talking about all of those identities that I associate with myself and saying, but being American is something that's underpinned all of this and has allowed me to do all these things for me is what it meant to be new American. And that line was one of the last things I wrote. It definitely wasn't in the beginning because as I take you through the essay, I think you are able to see how I got there. And as I worked with the essay, I eventually got there. So it was kind of a process on both ends to get there and be able to articulate it. Because it's something that I never had to articulate, as Craig mentioned before. So yeah, that's kind of how I answered that question. And I would say, at least for me, it did take it, that was the end of the process of understanding that for myself. So I guess don't feel bad if it takes you a couple of versions to get there, but that's how I approach that.
Great. And Henry, someone wrote in the Q&A that their family also came from a background where the government went to war with their family's country. And there was a lot of grief and trauma in their family as a result of the country killing their family members. And that was a source of anger for them. So, it also motivates their deep desire to make positive change in this country. How did you balance both understanding the role of the U.S. in they're saying our family's countries while being honest, but also not making it seem anti-American? So I don't know if you can, connect to that, but just that it was posed to you. So I will give it to you.
Yeah, maybe my perspective is a little different. So my So my grand that I think that that's very difficult. And I think like it's really weird because I don't want to maybe go into history, but the US came and there was a lot of death. But for me specifically, my story was only, it was in some ways only possible because of that. Like my parents were refugees and they were relocated to the US. And because of that, I received opportunities I maybe wouldn't have received otherwise. And this isn't condoning what had happened, but that's where I focus kind of that part. I don't go that far back into trying to balance that. And for me, it was more of a perspective of gratitude for what my grandparents and what my parents gave up, sacrificed, and went through to enable me to have the opportunities today. So it was a bit more, that perspective was a little different.
And that's a great question and a great response. And I think, the thing to know is that while our fellowship is committed to the values of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, we understand that there are a lot of different perspectives. There's a lot of tensions in what it means to be a new American and the new American experience. And fellows are all grappling with different experiences and identities and histories. So, we welcome you to bring those different perspectives into your essays. And we don't have a specific perspective that we are looking for from you. So I think, feeling connected to your essay, like just speaking your truth and like sharing what is right for you is, and going through the reflection process is probably the best that that we can all do. So I want to move to the second essay, but we will certainly come back to this first one through the questions. But this second essay is all about much more, it's still a personal essay in that it's all about you, but it's, and I didn't say this, I answered in the Q&A, but each of these essays is 1,000 words max. But this second essay is about your current and near-term career goals. Why are you applying to grad school? Why are you going to grad school? What is the contribution that you're hoping to make in the long term? And it's really walking through the committee. The first essay is telling us like who you are and what makes you tick. And the second essay is getting us really grounded in your work and the type of questions you're working on, thinking about, and then kind of much more the practical side of things. And this is really where you can share what your goals are and get us excited about your field. And remembering, as Craig was mentioning, that different people are going to be reading this essay. Some of them are going to be very familiar with your field, and others are going to be more generalists. And so you're going to be talking to different audiences, and it's important that you can keep them all engaged. But this is, also a challenging essay because you don't want to just regurgitate your resume. So Leslie, on that note, how much of your resume was in your second essay? Like, did you kind of avoid listing out resume activities? Like, what was the balance there?
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe it's a little different. I forgot to mention, but excuse me. I applied with already 1 year into grad school, so I wasn't coming straight from undergrad. I was in my fall semester of my first year of grad school, and so I was hoping to find funding for my final and also to find this community, which I was so grateful for. And so yeah, so I had already kind of been in the grad school atmosphere, and I was taking my classes and all these things. And so I think I talked less about like the resume stuff. I talked more about like well being in the new environment, and I talked more about that experience. And I mean, funny enough, like I honestly, I just finished this past week all of my graduate things. And so, and I like reflected on my final critique for architecture, and I was like, wow, like if it wasn't for Pretty Sorrows, I wouldn't have been able to do this. I did like a final thesis where I designed like a school for Mexican American youth and near the border. And I was like, wow, like if it wasn't for Pretty Sorrows, I would have never gotten to do this project. And to be honest, like humbly speaking, I do think it's like my best project yet. And so I was like, wow, like it's so crazy because it wasn't even about the funding. It wasn't about that. It was about the people that I met. And it was also that someone and like the community like looked and like empowered me and was like, no, you can do it, like you're supposed to be here. And so I think that was what my second essay was about, was like I'm in grad school, I worked in these things to get here, and I kind of talked about like I want to keep going, these are my visions, but I'm not really sure how to get there yet, but this is who I am and this is what I want to do. And that's kind of how I stated it, because it's very true. Like that's where I was. So I wouldn't say I talked so much about resume stuff. I just talked about like where I was in the moment. So yeah, I think
That's
that's
perfect.
what I remember.
Wait, Leslie, is your Instagram public?
No.
Okay, all right. I was gonna tell everyone to follow you, but if it's not, so don't. Because she does make beautiful work, but you can probably
You can find me on
Google.
LinkedIn.
I'm sure there's some great things out there. Yeah, so I think one thing that Leslie's saying that is particularly important is like she's getting you excited about architecture and why architecture is so important. She believes architecture is important. And you have to remember that you also have to believe whatever you are working on is going to be critically important. And if you don't, that's going to be a challenge in our process, right? So get excited about your field, get other people excited about your field and your work, but also like when you are throwing out that fishing rod, like you're casting, like go far, paint a big vision for us, get us excited about the long term. If you get too stuck in kind of the logistics of the near term and like what is exactly possible, I think it can sometimes be challenging to get people really excited about your potential. And so imagine your future without walls and barriers in between. If everybody was helping you, what would you want to be? What would you be? That's what I think readers are really excited to hear from you about. I'm gonna just keep, the one or two more questions on this. Jupneet, I'm gonna ask you, like, what is your biggest piece of advice for applicants on this second essay? What would you tell them is the most important thing to keep in mind?
Yeah, I think for this essay, I tried to bring in all of the experiences that I thought informed my career the most. So I mentioned, the different degrees I've done, but I also tried to bring up the program that I started. I thought that was a big uh, lead into my career because I worked on a program for kids affected by domestic violence. And then I also did research with a trauma department who was working with my organization and then eventually published a paper. So all those things were very interconnected for me and were the reason I was pursuing trauma surgery. So I wanted to express all those different experiences and show why that led me to trauma surgery. And the other big thing I wanted to show was why I was doing military medicine. So then I kind of brought in some experiences about military medicine and some different research I had done, and then also explained why the graduate program I was doing. So I think that's super important because PD Soros is funding this graduate program. Obviously, that's not the only part of PD Soros, but a big part of it is you're applying to a graduate program, so you want to explain how that fits into your career goals. So a big part of my essay was explaining why I was going to med school, why I was going to this med school and this program, and how that fit into not only medicine, but also military medicine for me. So I think one of the most important things to do is balance kind of your previous experiences and the research or whatever career related experiences you've done before with your future graduate program and show how they come together. So I brought in, the research from before, but also talked a little bit about aspirationally what I would want to do at Harvard and which labs I would want to work at, and also then how that would eventually lead me to my ultimate career goals and long-term career goals of working in policy or being a physician leader. So I think trying to kind of weave your, I guess, life goals or life vision and take the readers through kind of a timeline of these are the kind of the experiences I've done. This is kind of where I want to go and why I want to do this, and this is what I want to do in the future. That's kind of the route I took. Not exactly like a chronology, but just trying to hit on all those different parts to make it to show that it was kind of a path of this is where I want to eventually end up, and this is why, and these are the things that I've done. This is what I want to do.
Amazing. Henry, do you have any advice that you would add on top of that? And then I'm going to jump into this Q&A because there are lots of questions, and I would just want to encourage everyone to click on the little thumbs up for any questions that you want to kind of upvote so that we have a hierarchy here.
Yeah, just to quickly, I distinctly remember that it was really difficult for me to separate these two essays. And I think the way I found how to do that was to the first essay to really focus on my experience, and that really was centered around like my childhood, maybe entry into like college and the motivations behind what I'm doing. The second essay, so I'm a PhD student. The second essay was a lot more curiosity driven, and I think like maybe relative to other PhD students who have like, they worked for one single lab, have worked on a long-term project over like their 4 years in college. I jumped around a lot. And it wasn't always the easiest to like look back and connect, like draw a line through everything. But each and every single one of those experiences were crucial into motivating what I'm excited about doing now. And so I think like that distinction was really helpful for me to separate the two essays. But I will say I couldn't write the second essay until I had written the first one. I think another important thing was as Nika said before, a lot of different people will be reading this from many different backgrounds. And I tried to emulate that. I asked people from different fields and different levels of expertise, and it really helped me streamline what I was trying to communicate. Basically, like the most important one was talking to my best friend and him asking, why did I do this? And what exactly does this mean? And distilling things into a way that's understandable, but still really exciting, and still shows like maybe the complexity behind what I'm trying to achieve during grad school.
Great. Amazing. All right. We are going to jump into questions. Craig, I am going to ask you the most voted question, which is, some people say essay 2 is similar to a graduate school statement. How do you recommend approaching it differently or similarly compared to a typical grad school application? Great question.
I used to say that, and so I'm probably the one who started that. And I do think it's to a certain extent it's true. But like Leslie said, she was already in a year into grad school at the time she's writing this essay. So, your perspective changes and you have more understanding of where you want to head, perhaps, or, you may have different things to say now that you have that perspective of being a grad student. But something else somebody said recently actually struck me as perhaps being even more significant. And that's that, we're asking you to think big and to really think about what that impact you're going to have on the world is. And a grad school essay maybe is a little more just kind of nuts and bolts, like, what do you want to work on? How's it going to help you get there? But we're asking you to think big. And this is an opportunity for you to really present your vision for the future. And that might not be something that you would put in a grad school essay. So while I do think there are some similarities because you're talking about how this grad program is going to help you achieve your goals and what some of your goals are and, why this grad program makes sense, I do think there are some ways that it might be different, again, and particularly thinking about thinking big.
Great. And Craig, two people at least have asked about not growing up in the United States and how that might change their the New American essay, since they didn't grow up here. You know, one person said that they moved to the States at the age of 9, and they, you know, is it appropriate for them to go back as to like 4th or 6th grade memories for writing this essay?
Well,
The first essay, the New American essay.
yeah, I mean, I would certainly say, you know, many people go back to talking about their grandparents and their parents' journey. So it's certainly appropriate for you to go back to 4th grade or 6th grade, or, you know, even, you know, some people start thinking about this essay by talking to their parents and hearing stories about some of their motivations and some of their goals and some of their dreams. And so, again, people often start before they were even born in these essays. So it's certainly not a problem for you to start early. And for someone who moved here very recently, I think you still have some understanding of why you want to be here, why this is where you intend to make your home, and what you hope to accomplish through your life's work in this country. You know, we're looking for people who are going to make a contribution to, you know, United States culture, United States, you know, society. And so I do think you still have a perspective on all of those, regardless of when you came. And let me tell you, we've had, you know, every essay, every different kind of a New American background represented in the fellowship. So you certainly wouldn't be the first person who moved to this country recently and are applying for the fellowship.
Great. And Jupneet, I'm going to ask this to you just very quickly. Somebody said their New American experience is what motivated them to pursue medicine, and they were wondering how they can avoid overlap between their essays. How did you approach that?
Yeah, I think the way I approached that was, for my first essay, I focused a lot more, we talked about this, on my why and like my really deep motivations and anecdotes behind why I was pursuing the career I wanted to do, or kind of the path I wanted to have. I definitely mentioned medicine in my first essay because it's a big part of my story now. And I mentioned some clinical experiences, but it was much more focused on how that motivated me to do what I wanted to do. And then for my graduate school, or not the graduate school, sorry, for essay 2, I focused more on research experiences, or kind of my programs that I'd started that were a little bit more career focused, and just talked more directly to what my career would actually look like. So for example, in my second essay, I talked about the surgery research I'd done, and then I talked about some other maternal health research I'd done, and also the program I started, and just talking about these more career focused experiences. So I think if maybe thinking about which experiences or stories were more kind of motivation focused or why focused versus more professional or career focused can give a little bit of a delineation between the two, but they definitely should complement each other. So seems like it's looking in the right direction.
Great.
If I can weigh in on this, also, I think sometimes people feel like we have some rigid, you know, understanding of what should be an essay 1 and what should be an essay 2, but we really don't. And many people are talking about career goals in essay number 1, and many people are talking about some of their New American experience in essay number 2. You know, and there isn't, they can be fluid, and they can run into each other in terms of content, because that's real life.
Yeah, I definitely switched around some paragraphs between the 2 essays because I wasn't sure, would this fit here, would this fit here? And I would kind of read through and see. So definitely very fluid between the 2.
And you have your resume, and you also have your recommendation. So like there's other places and you know, ways that you can tell your story and make sure that, you know, everything is there that you want to be there. And somebody asked, are there examples of essays from successful fellows that we can refer to, Craig?
We do not put essays on the website. I'm opposed to this because I really want to hear your story, and I worry that people will read essays and then try to use those as templates. But there is no template for a great essay, for a winning essay. There's as many great essays out there as there are applicants. And so I just rather you go from your own your own personal thoughts and ideas and background rather than looking at someone else's essay. That being said, we are a fellowship that allows and encourages you to work with mentors, to work with fellowship advisors, to work with other trusted people in your life. And it's okay for you to show your essay to someone and get some feedback. Your work must be original. It must be your own work. But many great original works have had someone give some feedback. So we're okay with that. And we certainly encourage you to have somebody, take a look and let you know what they think.
Great. And somebody said they wanted to know who will have access to their essays and if they would ever be shared outside of those individuals, or if they could be requested. They want to share their parents' immigration story, but they came to the US irregularly and are concerned about revealing that. Craig.
Well, our goal is to keep your information private, and that means that it's read by members of our screening team and members of our interview team, and in-house by our staff. The people who would need to have access to your to your information.
Yeah.
Great.
I also wanted to add a little bit to that because actually when I was applying, that was a concern that my parents had as well. And so I would say, like, I mean, I can't give the best advice because everyone's situation is different, but you always want to make sure that your family is also comfortable with what you're applying to, and if they don't feel comfortable, then maybe it's not the best thing to do. But obviously, everyone's situation is different. I just felt that I wanted my family to feel comfortable and seen that I was representing them in the light that they wanted to be shown in. So yeah, that was a concern that my parents had too as well because we were talking and stuff. So you just want to make sure that you're all on the same page, I think.
I
Absolutely.
think that's great advice.
Yeah, and you will be on our website if you get the fellowship, and therefore it's good to have that conversation now as opposed to later, because we will be sharing your name and your story. And so it's important that everybody's on the same page.
But just to be clear, we're sharing your name and your story, but we're not sharing
your essay.
your essay. So you have
Yes,
you have
absolutely.
right, to craft the story for the bio for our website that you're comfortable with.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, it is the end of the hour, and so I want to close us out. In the chat, there is, thanks to Yami, there's an applicant guide to essays. So this is a guide for you that we put together actually with our 2016 fellows about how they worked on their essays. So it's a really good resource. You can always give us a call if you have additional questions. But I really want to thank our three fellows, Jupneet, Henry, Leslie, and Craig and Yamilet. Thank you so much for joining and helping out. We are here for you, and we know you have a lot more questions. So we'll try to make sure we have more sessions coming up, and we'll also have this recording up on our YouTube channel soon. So thank you all. We really, really appreciate it, and we're so excited to read your essays and your stories. Have a great day, everyone.